Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Healthy, Wealthy, and Smart podcast. I'm so happy to have you join us today. And today we're going to talk about marketing for the science professional. So I know that there are a lot of people in the health and wellness and science field that listen to this podcast. So this is just the perfect person to have on. So today I'm happy to have on Elizabeth Chabe, the CEO of High Touch Group and author of The Giant's Ladder, the science professional's blueprint for marketing success. Elizabeth blends her passion for science, storytelling, and strategy to help innovators successfully market their groundbreaking work. When she's not building brands, you'll find her hiking the hills of her Mexican town with her rescue dogs or nourishing mind and body through yoga and meditation. Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Karen. I'm excited to be here.
Thrilled to have you and can't wait for all of your insights on marketing because I feel like you always know someone who's got an idea, right? And sometimes it's like, well, I've got this great idea, but oh, I'm not going to do it because no one's going to care. How am I going to get the word out? It's just me. So I can't wait to dive into all of this and get your insights. But before we do that, would you mind giving the listeners a little bit more about your background and how you got to the point you are in your career?
Sure. So I'm the CEO of High Touch Group and a science marketing strategist. And what that means is I work with science and technology innovators to build real market traction for products and services. And I specialize in biotech and MedTech specifically. So for a lot of your listeners, that might mean wearable technology that maybe isn't available in stores yet, but will be in the next few years to help with quantified self. I do a lot of work with biotech, like novel vaccine delivery systems, for example, getting some of those amazing innovations out of laboratories and into public health initiatives, into pharmacies, into doctors' offices where they can make the most impact. And because I run my own company, I get to choose which companies I work with. And so my team and I work with a select group of something like 12 to 15 companies per year, many of which we have hand selected to sort of go through our process. And yeah, I help them fundraise. We help them develop their marketing and go-to-market strategies. We do all sorts of stuff. And when I'm not doing that, I live in Mexico. I rescue dogs, and I write books.
Oh, I love it. My sister doesn't rescue dogs, but she fosters rescue dogs.
Oh,
So they'll
that's some of
do
the
that.
hardest work.
I know. I fostered once and I could never do it again. I was inconsolable. My mom was like, you can never do this again. It was
Yeah.
just like heartbreaking. I would have 1,000 dogs in my one bedroom
Yes.
apartment in New York City. You
Me
know,
too.
it's too hard. So kudos to you for working with the dog rescue organizations. Now, let's get into some questions here. So, as you said, you've helped drive innovations from sort of smaller niche discoveries to big products through your work at High Touch. So, can you, if you can, walk us through a specific example where maybe you took a groundbreaking scientific innovation that was quote unquote undiscovered and transformed it into a marketable product?
Sure. So I'll give two examples because one is from my life prior to High Touch Group when I was internal doing marketing at the Jackson Laboratory. I was in charge of strategic marketing initiatives. And that example, I think, will resonate especially for grad students, postdocs, maybe people who have been on the patient side of medicine, but are thinking about going back into industry, for example, or going into a lab, because internal marketing and launching of products is a little different than doing it as an entrepreneur. And then I'll give you an example from the High Touch in the corporate world. So when I worked at the Jackson Laboratory, this was, 12-ish years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I helped launch the first commercial CRISPR programs. So now we hear CRISPR and it's always in the news, and more people, lay people, know what it is. But 10 or 12 years ago, there was an IP battle going on. There were dueling inventors, and there were also not as many there were almost no commercial applications at the time of CRISPR. So people were even thinking of it as, I would say less visionary people were thinking of it almost as a loss leader for other services, as opposed to something that could be a service in and of itself. But my team and I were very convinced that CRISPR, in our context, which was working with genetically modified mouse models used in most biomedical research, that those models, rather than breeding them through a breeding program and waiting weeks for you to be able to enroll your mice on study, to be able to have an entire cohort delivered almost immediately because of the CRISPR, genetically modifying those mice through CRISPR instead of a breeding program, was something that could save years. Breeding space, incredibly important. For those of you who come from academic labs, incredibly important, that breeding space, and your vivarium space, very important. And so my team and I really thought that this was potentially transformative, and it was, but it took a lot to get from this idea. There was that IP battle going on, so there were legal hurdles to get through. But when it was all said and done, we launched one of the first commercial CRISPR programs ever, and it was a lot of fun, and learned a ton doing it, and made some great connections in the biotech community while doing that, because they were some of the people really pushing for these programs. In the corporate world, through High Touch, I'm working a lot of the time with entrepreneurs who have gotten at least their Series A funding, so they're sort of past pre-seed, they're past seed, they're at least at Series A or B, and they might be positioning for an acquisition, or they might be looking just for a buyout from private equity, especially if they're in biotech or medtech. So following my experience with Jax, I was hired by somebody who had purchased a mouse vivarium company, essentially. So preclinical research spaces, real estate, with specialty laboratory and breeding spaces. And the idea that we sort of hit on from that he's hit on from a business strategy perspective was, let's make this the WeWork for Bavaria. Let's make this a place where grad students, postdocs, they want to go because it's hip co-working space, fractional Bavaria models, and just something that's affordable, but also cool. And there were other fractional Bavaria at the time. I mean, it was a total real estate play. And there wasn't a ton of differentiation between the spaces. I mean, if he's listening to this podcast, Sandy, I'm sure you could nitpick around differentiation. But a lot of it was around the story and the brand. This brand really was supportive of young, innovative researchers in tech hubs in Boston, Cambridge, San Diego, San Francisco, and so on. And so we rebranded the facility. My team did a lot of interior design work and working with space planners and architects to make the spaces feel really comfortable. We work closely with their VP of Business Development to, of course, hit those business milestones, those financial milestones for the company. And then Charles River Laboratories ended up buying the company for like $275 million or something like that. A couple of years later, we did a rebrand, a lot of messaging work. So that was another just great experience. And again, it allowed me to network with a lot of biotech leaders who were struggling with the same problems, whether we were talking about the ones that spun out of the Jackson Lab, or the ones the Jackson Lab was working with, the innovators I worked with while running R&D programs at the University of Maine, and then seeing it again in High Touch, especially in microcosm, with so many different biotechs going in and out of those Bavaria facilities. And so it really was a great learning experience and helped me better understand some of the pitfalls that these early biotech companies can really fall into if they don't have strong senior leadership teams and commercial strategy support.
Yeah. And that sounds so interesting, that kind of WeWork for labs. So is that like, if you're a postdoc or you're a graduate student and this is what I got from it, you correct me if I'm wrong, you need lab space, you need and they would be able to go to one of these facilities for that and sort of rent it instead of being, because I would assume space in universities and things like that are finite, right?
Exactly.
So that's
Exactly.
kind of what, so it had all of the lab equipment you might need and everything else all within that space.
Exactly. And it was
Cool.
fractional. So rather than having to, I mean, most of these biotech startups, one of the biggest hurdles and something that these fractional, you see fractional Bavaria, but you also see fractional wet lab space, which would be another sort of solution to another part of the biotech development problem. But it's very expensive to develop these labs yourself. And a lot of
Right.
tech start in academia, they're NIH funded, maybe they get some NSF like SBIR funding or STTR funding to sort of transition out of the lab, but it's not going to be enough to have your own facility, and your early investors don't want to invest in all of that capex in order to help you vet your program. You're not even
Right.
trial yet or anywhere near that. So it
Right.
gives you sort of that happy space of when you are too big for a university, but too small for your own facilities.
Got it. And could you define that sort of fractional space, just because you've mentioned that a couple of times, just so people understand what you mean?
Sure. So similar to WeWork, how you might rent a cubicle and a share of a conference room, a share of a photocopier, a
Mm-hmm.
share, other facilities that WeWork provides. Very similar thing with fractional wet lab space, fractional Bavaria. It's the same idea. You might be a
Mm-hmm.
small company, might be 2 or 3 people, and basically just a company on paper with maybe a little IP attached. You need a
Right.
space to be able to continue your lab work, but you're not going to have 20 people there every day. Although some of these facilities are large, they're designed to scale with teams, just like with
Mm-hmm.
some facilities, you could rent out a floor.
Got it. Got it. Very interesting. And now all of this, when we think of marketing, and you mentioned it quickly as you were describing what you do, is telling a story around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a product and you have to kind of attach a narrative to that. So scientific discoveries, as I'm sure people can tell just by your telling of your story, is it's technical, it's complex. So how do you approach the challenge of translating some of this cutting edge research, or to the example you just gave, a cutting edge process to get to the research, into compelling stories that resonate with stakeholders and with the everyday person as well?
I think that there are a couple of ways that we can talk about storytelling, right, around brands. And one of the most important that we start with when we are working with new founder teams, which happens sometimes, is, who is your product and to whom? What does it do? What is it? Whose life does it improve or impact? And why? And just by starting to ask these questions, you start to get at, okay, is this product really solving a problem? Do we know that this is a problem? What market validation do we have that this is a problem? Who does the founder think the customer is, and why? Has there been any validation work to see if that really is the customer, right? So there are all of these baseline questions that you start to weave into these
Mm-hmm.
strategic, conversations with clients or prospective clients. And, as you answer those questions, you start to understand where the gaps are. And then you really do need to fill those gaps. So the story doesn't come first, kind of all of that boring stuff, all of those details. What's the product? Who's it for? What problem does it solve? How does it solve the problem? That's more important than making it sound good. From there, I have great writers on my team who write far better hooks than I do, but you essentially come up with that hook. There's usually some central idea that comes from that core question, answer, and research phase. There's usually a central idea. We work for fractional Bavaria. That's a very tangible idea. From there, you can see how a story falls out. You can see how the company might brand itself. You can see how the colors might look. You can see
Mm-hmm.
who their audience is, right? Because if I'm the We Work for Fractional Bavaria, I'm not trying to attract the 75-year-old professor emeritus. I'm looking for movers and shakers who want to get into biotech specifically, who are entrepreneurial, who understand what WeWork is and what that model is and how they can fit into it. And it starts to almost sell itself that way. And so, but without those first steps of what's the product, what problem does it solve, and who does it solve the problem for, and how, you really can't craft any sort of story. You're essentially just selling vivarium space, which isn't as exciting because you're not necessarily solving a problem as you are with fractional, and you're not positioning it in the market or saying who it's for like you would by saying it's the work of.
Yeah. And I think when you say that, people, they understand. Like if you, as you were telling that story, if you didn't say WeWork, I would have been like, I have no idea what this person's talking about.
Yeah.
You know, but when
Yeah.
you said that, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like that's pretty cool. And it's a great idea. And how, as you go into companies and you and your team are conducting these interviews and you're learning more about the company and what its mission and its vision, and they're answering all those questions you just mentioned, how, I don't know how to word this correctly. I'm going to say this and it might not be exactly the way it comes out. Okay. How often do founders get it wrong?
99% of the
Okay. I thought it was going to be a lot lower.
No, I mean, I wish that I could say, I mean, it could just be the founders. I've worked with, 200 and some odd founders at this point, likely more through, I'm also, when I'm not doing this, I'm also a director of a venture fund based in Maine. And so I work with a lot of founders in all sorts of ways. And, it's a great question, but that's why agencies that work specifically with early stage companies exist. And that's also why I can't sit here and say, we make websites for companies or we do ad buys for companies, because when you're working with companies that new, you're really trying to help them figure out product market fit so they can communicate that message to investors in a different way, so that they can get early traction with customers or through a pre-sub process with regulatory or whatever it is they need to do to show traction to get their next to their next milestone, which might mean funding release from VCs especially. And so, most scientists who are these inventors of products, I have a lot of empathy for, because they have spent years becoming experts in a small corner of the world. They have an amazing idea and they really just need help pulling out the commercial, the ways to make it a commercially viable product and not necessarily an idea or a scientific innovation per se.
Right. And it's, I mean, gosh, all that work that's the deep work that has to happen. And I think you can correct me again if I'm wrong, but when people think of marketing, they think of kind of what you said, like, oh, you're writing splashy copy that we can put on our website, and we're going to do Google ads or Facebook ads or what have you, which is like so far down the road. Yes. But when people think of marketing, I think that's what they think of.
Absolutely. And scientists, especially. And, scientists, there's a great book by Hamid Ganadan, a friend of mine at the Linus Group, another science marketing agency that focuses on strategy. It is called Persuading Scientists. And it's all about how scientists as this archetype. Now, scientists are just human beings, right? So they have all the same sort of thoughts and feelings, obviously, that humans do. So I'm generalizing quite a lot. But they do.
I love it that you said they have the same thing as regular humans.
Well, I mean, I do feel like sometimes there's a gap. I'm working with these physicists right now, Karen, and man, that is a different world. But that's a different conversation. I think that scientists tend to be analytical and to sometimes be a little bit on the nose, so to speak, especially when it comes to explaining what a product does. They tend to go very technical very quickly. And this helps them establish, hey, I'm a domain expert. I'm a subject matter expert. I can name all these acronyms and I know what they mean. And I, can talk really fast about the biochemistry behind this particular molecule and how I developed it. And that is awesome for very specific conversations. But in general, they tend to be skeptical of anything glossy or overly marketed, overly dressed up. I've heard all of these terms.
So too salesy,
Litzy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've heard this too, because I've heard this. I listened to a couple of episodes to prep for this conversation, and I know that there's definitely this idea that you shouldn't be selling a scientific product,
Right.
which doesn't make any sense. So essentially, those first few strategy conversations, especially if it's a founder scientist who doesn't have a co-commercial lead yet, is really around making them comfortable with this idea that it's okay to sell your science. That's how this company gets off the ground and keeps going. And we're not lying. We're not putting lipstick on a pig. What we're doing is we're making the important aspects of this for the people who are going to fund it and the people who are going to buy it very, very clear, because they don't have the same technical background. It might not be as clear if you just kind of rattle off what the innovation is and what the theory is based on, as opposed to connecting the dots to what these investors care about, which is often money. It might be clinical outcomes,
Right.
And so on.
Right. Yeah. It's like you have to counsel some of these folks to get the ick factor out of their sensibilities.
Yes.
Right. Which can be hard. And like you said, I've had this conversation many times, because even as a healthcare provider, oftentimes you're like, oh, like, I don't like, is it okay to charge someone? Because we're just,
yes. It is.
And
you're an
expert. It is, but it takes time to kind of get over that that block, if you will, that roadblock.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And I was spoiled. One of my first jobs in marketing, I was actually running R&D programs at a research laboratory, and my boss was one of the best. He was an incredibly, he was a PhD, he was an engineer, he was he was all these different professor of all these different things, because he had so many accolades, so many patents under his name and so on. But he was one of the best salespeople you'd ever meet. And it's rare, but once in a while you do find that person who just loves to be on stage, loves to perform in front of an audience and talk deeply about commercial strategy and scientific strategy. But it's rare.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's to your point, that's where your expertise of being able to tell a story comes in, so that that story resonates with investors and the general public. And sometimes, like, if you don't know how to do it, then enter folks like you who can really help, because you may have the greatest scientific invention, but if it never gets past the front door, you're not going to help anyone.
Exactly. Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So, okay. Obviously you're an expert in these kind of biotech and diagnostics manufacturing, that has seen massive changes in the past recent years, 10 years, let's say. So how has your approach to science marketing evolved, particularly in terms of digital channels, data-driven decision-making, and what worked a number of years ago within this marketing space that now you just would never work?
So I'll talk about biotech and medtech, because I think they're both really important here, and their stories are a little different. But in biotech, the biotech investment kind of had this amazing heyday from 2015 to right around 2020, 2021. Lots of venture capital investment, but it was still, and lots of excitement, right? But there were a lot of failures. And I think VCs especially felt a little burned. And in medtech, you saw something similar happen to a smaller extent, especially around COVID, because everybody and their mother had a COVID diagnostic product, and every venture capitalist is like, yes, let's do this at PCR. Yes, let's do a molecular at-home version of this thing.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just, I would argue, so I'll put on my VC hat for a moment. I would argue that always the best idea is to look at companies from a fundamental principles perspective. So is there a market? Is there any sign of market traction? Is there a validated product market fit? If they're not quite there yet, what are some of the leading indicators or proxies that we can use for now? What's the core team like? You know, is the management team experienced? If they're not, you know, do I have capacity to gap fill there? So that's sort of what VCs are thinking, but it's also what I'm thinking. If I'm working, I work with fewer and fewer early stage founders these days, just because of the volatility in the market, honestly. But even with these companies that have gotten Series A funding, they're still identifying, they still may not have gotten to the product market fit stage, right? And so getting back to fundamental principles all the time, which is business strategy and not marketing gloss, is so important, vitally important. And I think that it will not only make these science companies more successful, but it will also make sure that VCs are thinking a little bit longer term in some of their investment strategies and not just kind of hopping on the next big thing. You know, we've seen so many failures in like CAR T therapies, for example. That's sort of the classic example of great idea, not quite there yet. Precision medicine, same thing. And so I think we have to sometimes be more realistic about just how long some of these technologies take to get to market. I saw some interesting news today that a private equity firm is going to be funding a Harvard lab because of so many NIH grants getting pulled. Right. And I think that that's interesting because private equity does sometimes tend to be there for more than a 2 to 3 year time horizon. Sometimes VCs want to at least see the next raise before then. So it could be interesting from a horizon perspective if we see a little bit more commercial mindset in the lab, and there are pros and cons there, as well as perhaps some more commercial readiness before of those labs start raising. But from marketing, like just pure marketing, not business strategy, I would say I don't care about your convoluted marketing funnel. Like, honestly, I don't want any friction. I don't know about you, but like as soon as somebody's like, fill out this 12 question form to get this 2-page PDF, that's just going to be a bunch of corporate jargon anyway, it's just not worth it, right? Yeah. And so I think getting rid of this idea that a marketing campaign is successful because you get a form fill, it's maybe a leading indicator of success, but if it's not corresponding to closing a deal, for example, or opening up the door for a sales team, then it's not really a great metric. So I would argue getting rid of this idea that there's a traditional marketing funnel and that marketing is responsible for this part and all of that gated content. Just get rid of the friction, get the customer closer to the or the prospect closer to the information they're looking for faster. And that's just another way of providing value and being great to work with, as opposed to, you know, just very lead magnet, gated content, marketing funnel driven. I love lead magnets, don't get me wrong, but just not in this gated friction.
Right. Oh, that is going to ruffle some feathers.
I know. It can be very successful, don't get me wrong, but it's super annoying.
I agree. Yeah. It's like, just, I'm happy to give you my email, just send me the stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I actually think it's one of the reasons why podcasts are so popular, because you're listening to it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. And you are not, there's no gating. Maybe there's an ad you have to listen to or something. If you're not a subscriber, big deal. You know, you're not, and you're getting so much information in a really convenient way. Packaged for you. You don't have to go to somebody else's website. You don't have to fill out a form. And I think that there is a term for this in marketing that's getting popularized. I did not come up with the term. I leave that to the great people at Spark Toro. But there is a term for this called zero-click marketing. And the idea is just get the information somebody is looking for quickly. Optimize your pages so they rank well in search. Be on the social platforms or podcasting platforms where they are. Be at the trade shows where they are. You know, the type of marketing you're doing. Don't rely on these lead funnels and keep bringing the traffic to your website.
Yeah, I always hated those funnels. But that's just me. I'm the same way. Like I like things easy. So to your point, the least amount of friction for me, you've got me. Like I will, you know, be a loyal fan and a loyal customer. So I think that's a great, I mean, that is just some really, really great insight. And not only because it satisfies my bias, but I think it's a really great insight for people. Now, can we talk a little bit more about the book, The Giant's Ladder? So, would you mind telling the audience a little bit more about the book and why you wrote it? And I'll hand it over to you.
Sure, thanks. So The Giant's Ladder is a book about science marketing for founders and for early stage founding teams. It could also be useful for early science marketers, but I really wrote it with the idea of I have worked with so many amazing faculty at national labs, at universities, at nonprofits like the Jackson Laboratory, and they can't sell their stuff. They can't sell their products. And they also shouldn't be throwing a lot of money at agencies at this stage. And so I feel like there used to be, I know that there used to be this program through the National Science Foundation called Communicating Science. And it was about how to communicate science to investors and also how to communicate your science to the general public, something that we also badly need right now, more public-facing science communication.
Yes.
And that program kind of went away. It's been subsumed by AAAS, great organization, but it's now a webinar-based program buried on their website that costs like $600 to buy. So the average scientist isn't going to go out of their way to do this really kind of boring, dated training, right? But it used to be a traveling training that tech transfer offices at universities and research nonprofits all over the country would bring instructors to. They'd train cohorts of scientists. And they would often pair it with entrepreneurship training and product development training as well. I was very lucky that the University of Maine, where I went to undergrad and also where I worked for a number of years at a research lab, the tech transfer office there was incredibly ahead of its time and did a lot of work with NSF and these entrepreneurship training programs. But programs like that are hard to come by these days. And I think that that is something that we really need to see more of. I might not be the best person to get it restarted at the National Science Foundation level since I don't work there. But I know that it can sometimes be easier to spend $20 on a book and just be able to give it to every grad student in your lab that shows any entrepreneurial interest, or buy a $10 audiobook. And that's it. That's how you do that same training. And so I thought I was writing this book for founders or for entrepreneurial scientists who just needed a few pointers, essentially. And how do you start thinking about marketing strategy for your business? How do you think about messaging strategy? Where should you spend your first marketing dollars if you're lucky enough to have a little funding for that? And what should you not do? Like, very importantly, what should you not do? Because that's where a lot of founders spend a lot of budget, honestly, without seeing return on that investment. Spending money on large trade shows before they're ready, spending a lot of money on like spray and pray, retargeting ads, social ads.
Wait, you said spray and pray?
Spray and pray. Have you? Yeah. So basically,
I've never heard that.
So let's say you have a $10,000 ad budget, rather than, thinking, oh, where are my customers? What platform are they on? How can I reach them? They'll just buy $10,000 of Facebook ads because that's where they are, or LinkedIn ads. And they'll just, yeah, I'm going to advertise to all dentists in the United States because I've got this product that will be phase 1 trials, that will someday be in a dental practice. And, and it's completely just off base, not at all what the company needs. And it's amazing how many founders are still thinking this way about their marketing budgets. We also see it a lot with trade shows because it can cost a small team, $30,000 to go to a small trade show. Do they need to be there? What are the goals of the trade show? A lot of the time they're just doing it because that's what they've seen other companies that they've worked for do, and that's their marketing pattern. So I wrote it for those teams. Because of writing the book, I'm now speaking at a lot of universities and small sales teams at founding orgs, and doing a lot of volunteer and mentorship groups, work with like student groups that are starting companies and that sort of thing. So I'm getting to work with founders again, just in a slightly different way.
Yeah. And you had mentioned what not to do, but what's the first step one of these researchers that might be struggling with their marketing, what's the first step they should take to climb their own giant's ladder to marketing success?
Asking themselves the question of who the product's for and what problem does it solve for them, and then validating that. So what we see a lot in biotech or sciences are tools companies, maybe a company that makes reagents, right? And they started making homebrew reagents in their own lab. And they said, hey, I think other scientists could use this in their labs because I've mentioned it to somebody at a conference and they said, oh, that's interesting. And that's the extent of their market validation. But, their tech transfer office has helped them, these federal agencies that are funding basic science research and even applied science research really want to see companies spin out, right? They want to see, the IP get out into the real world, so to speak, and out of the lab. And so often these scientists are incentivized to write grants to essentially transfer out of the university and into a commercial setting before they've even answered those basic questions. So before you're spending money, before you're raising money, before you're spending every night and weekend building your side project, really make sure that you're validating those basic assumptions, because all else is lost if you spend $1 million only to find out there is no market need for this.
Yeah, great advice. Now, you had mentioned the book Persuading Scientists. We just spoke about your book, The Giant's Ladder. Are there any other books you would recommend for people who are in this space of science and innovation and market strategy?
Yes, I'm a huge reader, so this is a great question. But I'll give two others. The first is Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey.
Yeah.
If you've been in the business world for a while, you've probably heard of this book, but a lot of products really do die in that chasm space. And very often it's based in not having very good product market fit evaluation earlier in the product's life cycle. It can also happen for other reasons, but that product market fit question is a big reason why products can't cross that chasm very well. And then the second, just because I think we need big thinkers these days who are tackling big problems, is blue ocean strategy. And this is just because how can you make not just products that solve a specific problem, but that really change how an industry thinks about a problem. And we need that in climate tech, we need it in biotech, we need it in MedTech, we need it in space tech, so many different areas. I'm lucky enough to get to touch in my daily work, but I'm not those innovators. I'm not the physicist working on some weird asteroid mining project, what I think is some weird asteroid mining project, but they're super excited about it. Those are the sorts of innovations I think that we're going to need in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I think Blue Ocean Strategy is a really great book for inspiring some strategic thought behind those big ideas.
Yeah, perfect. And now if we can bring it full circle and talk a little bit more about the mission-driven aspect of your work and how each copy of The Giant's Ladder directly benefits rescue dog charities. So we're bringing it back around to the dogs.
I love it. My puppies will be happy for that. Yeah, I work with some rescue dog charities, mostly here in Mexico where I live, both hands-on volunteering as well as financial support. High Touch Group also supports dog rescue charities as well as some public health programs through free retainer agreements and things like that. But every single dollar that goes that you spend on the book goes directly to the dog rescue charities. So I'm not taking profit from the book or speaking gigs. Those all go to the dog rescue charities. So altogether, we've helped support something like 500 dogs. And I foster, or I have four, I should say. There are 3 foster fails. So I love a failed fostering either.
I love a failed foster. That's amazing. And what a great way to incorporate some truly wonderful philanthropic work as you are out there helping all of these companies succeed as well. Now, before we wrap things up, what is sort of a big takeaway that you would like the audience to come away with from our conversation today?
I think that there is really an important gap in marketing and science product commercialization, and that is essentially that answering those early questions early enough, and then making sure that as you are growing your company, that you're not just thinking about what your product is going to do, or but that you're really thinking about the greater impact, because it's really hard work to grow a company. I can say that myself. I'm sure you can say that yourself. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that as well. And so it's really important to know that you're waking up every day and you're doing something to make the world a better place, because if you're not doing that, it can really feel like a grind, especially after you've gotten your fifth or sixth investor shutdown of the month or of the raise cycle, or that compound had a major failure and you're just not going to be able to move forward with it. And you have to make a tough decision or whatever it might be, letting go of staff, all these daily things that you have to do when running a business. Really important to have some mission behind what you're doing, some impact. And I think that also means that maybe we'll see more scientific products getting out into the marketplace that help people and communities.
Perfect. And where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, learn more about your company, they want to get the book? Where can we find all that info?
Sure. The book is anywhere, Amazon. It's on all the different bookstores, Barnes and Noble, all of that. And you can also get copies on elizabethchabe.com. My website, hightouchgroup.com, is the High Touch website. And if anybody is listening to this and they are interested in a copy of the book, but they can't afford it, maybe they've had their grant funding pulled, maybe they're students and they're entrepreneurial, send an email to inquiries@elizabethchabe.com. Somebody on my team will respond and get you a free PDF of the book.
Great. Awesome. And could you repeat that email one more time?
Yes, it's inquiries@elizabethchabe.com.
Perfect. And just so everyone out there listening, no matter what platform you're listening on, if you scroll down to the show notes, we'll have direct links to all of this. So one click will take you to all the information. And finally, last question that I ask everyone, knowing where you are now in your life and career, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Don't wait for a mentor or permission. Just move fast and figure it out on your own terms. You don't need somebody else's permission or a torch passed. Nobody's there to knight you the next fill in the blank. Just go do it.
Excellent advice. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. This was a great conversation. So many great insights. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
It was my pleasure. And everyone out there listening, thanks for tuning in. Have a great couple of days and stay healthy, wealthy, and smart.